Welcome to Autism ADHD TV with Holly. That's me, a neurodivergent therapist, mom, and passionate advocate for affirming approaches. Maybe you're a parent trying to support your neurodivergent child or teen, a therapist or educator wanting to learn more, or you're a neurodivergent person looking for strategies that truly honor who you are. Whatever brought you here, you're in the right place. We talk about the real stuff: emotional regulation, self-awareness, executive functioning, self-advocacy skills that build confidence, social connections that are authentic, and so much more. And hey, if you're looking for deeper learning, check the description notes below for information on my parent workshops and continuing education trainings for therapists. You're going to love it. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a so you never miss out. And if you find Autism ADHD TV helpful, please share it with someone, because together we can create more understanding about neurodiversity. Now let's get into it. Welcome, Laura Kerbey, to the Autism ADHD Podcast.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I am so glad that you're here, and I'm going to introduce you really quick. Laura is a neurodivergent adult, parent, and professional. She has worked within the specialist education sector for over 21 years and is the founder of Positive Assessment Support and Training and co-founder of Kite Therapeutic Learning Services. Laura has a special interest in pathological demand avoidance, is the author of the book, The Educator's Experience of Pathological Demand Avoidance, which is published by Jessica Kingsley Publishing and illustrated by Eliza Fricker. She is now writing a guide for late diagnosed women with ADHD and the Teen's Guide to PDA. And I can't wait to get my hands on that.
Yeah, there's a big gap for teenagers, actually. Like, all the books on PDA are very much aimed at either parents or like educators or younger children. There's nothing out there for teenagers. So that's one of the books I'm working on at the moment.
That is so exciting. So we'll have to have you come back on to talk about.
I'd love to do that.
Today we are going to start out with what is PDA and what are the signs?
Okay, as you've said, PDA stands for Pathological Demand Avoidance, and it is widely understood to be a type of or a profile of autism. I actually do autism and PDA assessments as part of 2 multidisciplinary teams. And what's really important to say, because when we were chatting before we started recording, you were saying, oh, in the States, you can't get a diagnosis of PDA. And I think you thought you could in the UK, but actually in the UK, you can't get a diagnosis of pathological demand avoidance. You have to have the PDA sort of diagnosis has to be part of an autism diagnosis or an autism assessment. So usually in the UK, somebody who's got that diagnosis, it will say something like autistic with a PDA profile, or the 2 teams that I work with, we say that the young person has met criteria for an autism diagnosis under the DSM, and within this also shows a profile of behaviour known as pathological demand avoidance. But you can't just be diagnosed with pathological demand avoidance at the moment. I think what is really important that people understand that PDA is a type of autism or is a profile of autism, but there are some significant sort of differences as well within a typical autism profile and a PDA profile, which I will talk about. But actually what's also really important is to say that you can be demand avoidant without having PDA. And I think this is where people get quite confused sometimes. Quite often a parent will come to us with their child for an assessment, and the parent will be already thinking my child has PDA or my child is PDA. And often we will say they are autistic and they are demand avoidant, but it's not pathological demand avoidance. So we have to look at, when we're doing our assessments, we have to look at various sort of aspects. So first of all, they have to meet criteria for an autism diagnosis, but you have to look at the kind of differences. So for example, I'm not a big believer in the whole eye contact thing anyway, but for example, with PDA, eye contact is not something that we usually pick up as being a difficulty. What we do look at though is the types of demands that are avoided. So we would look at, is the individual avoiding the demands that they actually want to themselves be able to comply with or fulfill. So we look for things like, we refer to it as self-imposed demand avoidance or internal demand avoidance. We also look at how the young person is avoiding the demands. So very often with a PDA profile, it won't just be like a simple no or a simple refusal. It will be that the young person or the individual is using very clever and very creative sort of tactics, so that you don't even realize sometimes that the demand that you're presenting the person with is being avoided. So PDAs will often use like either sort of social strategies. I might ask somebody to do something and they might say, Laura, I really like your earrings. They're really pretty, aren't they? They really suit you. And they'll start flattering me and charming me and distracting me so that I don't even realize that they've avoided the demand. That you might have very like extreme methods of avoiding the demand by saying something like pretending to be a cat. So lots of young people I work with will pretend to be cats or dogs, and they'll go into this role play of something and become something that can't possibly comply with the demand because they've got paws and not hands. And then we need to look at how the demands are avoided, the types of demands are avoided, and also why the demand is being avoided. Quite often the demand avoidance, you can see that it's quite rational. So for example, when I'm speaking to some children, they'll say to me, no, I can't go into school. And then I'll unpick that and I'll say, what is it about school? And they'll say, I've been really badly bullied, or it's too noisy, or it's too crowded. So you can rationalize the demand avoidance, but very often within a PDA profile, the demand avoidance seems quite irrational. And like I say, you might get avoidance of things that the young person wants to do as well as things they don't. So almost it can look like the individual is cutting their nose off to spite their face. So a really good example, and it wasn't deliberate, so that's why that kind of analogy, they're not cutting off their nose to spite their face. One example was a boy that we did an assessment with who was so excited about going to a big firework display. So in the UK, we celebrate Guy Fawkes Night on November the 5th. And he was so excited about going to this firework display. He was looking forward to taking his younger brothers. And then on the night of the firework display, his mum went upstairs and found him just overwhelmed with anxiety, walking around his room, wringing his hands. And she was saying, is it because it's too cold? No, it's not. I'm not that cold. Is it that you're worried about the noise? No, I like the noise. Are you worried about your little brothers getting lost? He's, no, we can keep hold of them. He was just saying, I just can't do it. And that's what we have to remember with PDA. It's not that these individuals with PDA are making a choice to avoid the demand. The demand is a threat to their autonomy. So PDA is often referred to by a lot of people either as a persistent or pervasive drive for autonomy as well, which I actually prefer as a kind of acronym for PDA, because that is what is so important to PDAs. People talk a lot about PDAs having a need for control, but actually I think personally that the need for autonomy is just as important to a PDA. And if you think about it, if you've got complete autonomy, you've got complete control, haven't you? And it's when you need autonomy and then other things start trying to control you that you then need to take control back. So personally, I don't find the young people that I work with PDA particularly controlling, but I think that's because they do have a lot of autonomy. But that is I've gone about it in a very long-winded way, but basically PDA is a type of anxiety that means that the person requires autonomy at all times, and if they don't have that autonomy, or if that autonomy feels threatened, then it will make them feel incredibly anxious. And then the more anxious they become, the lower their demands, so the lower their tolerance to demands will become.
I love how you explain that, because it really comes down to anxiety.
Absolutely.
And what makes it quite different, like you said, is oftentimes this child or teenager want to do it. Like they
Yes.
want to. And there is another demand where a person, a teen or a child does not want to. So I think that's something to consider too.
Yeah.
There is anxiety with that as well that we have to consider, because if we're asking them to do something that feels uncomfortable, but they don't want to do it because they want to do something else or whatever, that is something different. So I'm glad that you clarified that for us. A lot of parents will ask me about PDA and how do they respond to their children if we're asking a child or teen to do something and they have the profile PDA or the parent suspects PDA. We may have this initial idea where they're giving me a hard time or I need to make them. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think what's really important to remember with PDA, it's not won't, it's can't. I can't do this because I'm being told or expected to do it. So I think there's two things that are really important. One is to consider what I refer to as the what's in it for me factor. Okay. And I have a bit of an analogy to explain this. If we think that for someone with PDA, they have a need to remain autonomous. Okay. So if you take autonomy away from someone with PDA, it will cause this sort of huge sort of anxiety response. But the analogy that I use is and again, it's a bit of a roundabout way of saying it, but when I was younger, when my children were younger, my mum used to come over a couple of times a week to look after my children. And I love my children more than anything on the planet. Okay, they are the most important thing in my life. So I'm not just going to give my children up to anybody. If a stranger knocked on my front door and said, "Hi, I've seen you walking around the village with two small children. You must be absolutely exhausted. Let me take them off your hands for a couple of hours." I'm obviously going to just slam the door in their face. I'm not going to give up my children to a stranger. But I would give up my children to my mum for a couple of hours. And the reason that I did that was because I trusted my mum. I knew that my mum would look after my children really well. The second reason that I was prepared to let my mum take the children off my hands for a couple of hours is because I got something out of it. It was a reciprocal arrangement. I will give up these children that I love more than anything for a couple of hours because there's a what's in it for me. There was also what's in it for me for my mum as well. And lastly, I would give up my children for a couple of hours because I knew that they were going to come back. So you can use that analogy for somebody who's got PDA. If they're going to give up control, or if they're going to give up autonomy, first of all, they have to feel that the person that they are with is a very safe person. Now, hopefully, if you're a parent, your children have got that kind of trust and that safety there already. But sometimes those relationships can become quite broken and quite fractured, particularly if, you know, if people are really struggling in families, it can become quite fractured. Secondly, you know, that what's in it for me factor is really important. I'm not going to come off my Xbox and do my homework because there's very little what's in it for me factor. And thirdly, if they are going to give up control or they are going to give up autonomy, they've got to know that they will be getting it back. So I think what we have to do when we're parenting children with PDA is, first of all, always remember that them saying no is not 100% of the time, because all children and young people sometimes will just say no because they're just saying no. But with a PDA, they will say no because it's their anxiety response to that. So I think thinking of it as can't, not won't is really important. Secondly, what is the what's in it for me factor? What is my child going to get out of this thing that I'm asking them to do? And then the other thing we need to do is make sure that if we are asking someone to do something, that we are doing it in a way that is autonomous. So rather than saying, go and have a bath, offering, would you prefer to have a bath or a shower tonight? Would you like me to run the bath, or can you run the bath? Would you like bubbles in the bath tonight, or bath oils or whatever it is. Do you want to clean your teeth before you get in the bath or after you get in the bath? So by offering that choice, you are giving the child or young person some level of autonomy into that request. You just need to be careful though, because offering someone a choice doesn't mean that they're always going to make a choice, and sometimes making a choice can feel like a demand. But I think it can be quite difficult for some parents, depending on how they have been parented themselves. And I think that's something that's really important when you're parenting a child with PDA. It's almost like you have to get rid of all your expectations of what you thought being a parent was going to be about. Something else which is really important to remember if you're parenting a child with PDA, and I actually wrote about this the other day, is that children with PDA, young people with PDA, often find it very difficult to see hierarchy and see authority. So a lot of neurotypical children will just do what they're told by an adult because they think, oh, they're an adult and I'm a child, therefore I should just do what they say. And it's really important to remember when you're parenting a child with PDA that they just don't have that. They don't have that kind of understanding of I'm a child and you're an adult. So that was very much the way that I was parented, like you do what you're told. That doesn't work with someone with PDA. You've got to understand that they don't recognize hierarchy. And something else that I think is really important to ask parents is just ask yourself, does it really matter? You know, why am I asking my child to do this? Why am I insisting that my child comes and eats at the breakfast table? What could they not just eat their breakfast on the sofa? Why am I insisting that my child has to have a bath every single night? Sometimes it's just because we feel that's what they should do, or that's the way that we were parented. So I think asking yourself that question, does it really matter, is really helpful as well. And you mustn't see it as giving in to the child. It's not like this child is going to start running your life. They're more likely to start trying to control every aspect of your life if you don't give them that autonomy.
That makes so much sense. Our default is to go to how we were parented. And it's without even thinking. Like it just kicks in. I wouldn't have been able to get away with that. Or I was expected. Or the parents are feeling very pressured, whether it's the school or it's
other family members.
Exactly. Grandparents or whoever. It is so hard as that parent to be able to step back and say, I'm going to take another approach. It may not be understood, but it's what my child needs. This is what I'm going to say in case it's questioned, or how am I going to be confident in my approach? Because we can always come back and say, if this child was neurotypical, absolutely, that probably makes sense. We're not going to be in a situation where they're going to be saying no all the time anyway. This is not the same parenting journey as other people have. I like the way you were talking about that trust and that safety and thinking about it as a threat, because that's what it is. Even though it doesn't feel logical in that moment, they are responding to that threat. Another thing I would like people to consider, we want them to have a way to self-advocate. They're more vulnerable. They are more likely to mask. So if we give them these choices, instead of going, you're going to do this now, that's how I was parented and you're going to do it. We know that doesn't work anyway, so why bother? So if we take this approach, remembering, I want my kid, I want my teen to be able to say, this is what I need. I don't want them to feel like they don't have a say, they don't have a voice in what their experience is, because they are experiencing the world in a different way.
I completely agree with you. And one of the things that I get asked occasionally, and I completely understand why I get asked this question, is, aren't you setting them up to fail if you just give in to everything that they want? And I genuinely don't think we are, because actually the more autonomy somebody with PDA has, the higher their demand tolerance will be. And so what I see is when children are given like a more autonomous way of living or a lower demand way of living, it creeps into every aspect of their life. They're more likely to be able to self-advocate if they feel calmer. Then they're going to be more able to explain their needs if their anxiety is lower. The other thing is to say is that I have adult friends with PDA who are extremely successful, and they're in healthy relationships, they're parents, they run their own businesses, and those are the adults that I know with PDA who really understand themselves, and they can advocate for themselves. They can say, actually, I find this really hard because I'm PDA. I need you to do X, Y, Z so that I can feel better, so I can feel less anxious. And I think the earlier that we can do that, the better. I think a really helpful kind of first step with that as well is that, and there's two reasons for doing this, but I think it's so important that we role model to our children that sometimes we experience difficult emotions ourselves and that we experience anxiety. And I think there's two reasons for doing that. One, to be able to say, oh, you know what, I'm feeling a bit anxious or I'm feeling a bit stressed, so I'm just going to take 5 minutes just to allow myself just to calm and feel better. Or I'm feeling quite angry, I really don't want to shout at you, so I'm going to step out the room for 5 minutes, take a breath, and then I'll come back when I feel calmer. When we do that, what we're teaching our children is it's okay to have these really big emotions. We're also role modeling what we can do when we feel them. But the other thing that we have to be very careful and sensitive of with someone with a PDA profile is that they are so anxious that they can become hypervigilant to our tone of voice and our body language as well. So I wrote a post about this at the weekend, and last week it's just gone absolutely mad about how many times has your child accused you of shouting at them when you haven't? How many times has your child accused you of being angry with them when you haven't been angry? But the child with PDA will really pick up on that. And that's so important to understand from two kind of perspectives. One is, as a parent, if your child says, you're shouting at me. My youngest son used to do this when he was really anxious. He'd say, don't shout at me, mum. And I used to reply, I'm not shouting at you, which just completely invalidated how he was feeling. The first time I said, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was shouting, he was like, okay, thank you. So it was really good for me as a parent to realize that how I was being perceived. But then I could also speak to my son about the fact that I think when you're feeling really anxious, you think people are shouting at you when they don't mean to be shouting. So again, that's another reason why the self-advocacy is so important, to be able to think, is that person shouting at me? Is that person angry with me? Or am I just feeling anxious and therefore becoming more hypersensitive? And that's something that I'm still learning how to do with my ADHD diagnosis and having really bad rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Sometimes I think people are cross with me and they're probably not. But understanding that it's my RSD and it's my ADHD making me think like that has been really helpful. So I totally agree with what you said about the earlier we can start teaching people about their neurotype and their brain and their anxiety, the better.
I love that. And thank you for sharing your personal experience as well. When you're in an interaction with someone and you're feeling very anxious, but then you're not feeling safe to be able to say that you're anxious, or you're not feeling safe to be able to request additional information. I feel anxious right now. I feel like you're yelling at me. Is that what you mean to do? If a child is very anxious, it's going to be hard for them to regulate themselves in that moment to be able to communicate. Yesterday, I was working with someone with a PDA profile, and we were working on communicating back and forth to each other. Me writing out along with a visual is yes, no, or maybe we can do that later.
Yeah.
Let me know whether you want to touch that, look, or use your words. Totally up to you.
Yeah.
Those are types of little strategies that can make a very big difference. I want that person to trust me. I want them to know that what I say. Because a lot of times that's not the case. A lot of times these kids are experiencing big issues with trust.
Yeah, the theme of trust and the need to maintain trust and connection is probably a theme that runs through every chapter of my book. And obviously the book is aimed at educators, but actually what I've been really pleased with the book is the number of parents that have contacted me to say how much they have liked it. And actually somebody wrote a review today and said that as a parent they found it really helpful, because a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is not like environment specific. It doesn't matter whether you're in a home or you're in a place of learning. If you've got an individual that is hypersensitive to nonverbal communication, it doesn't matter which environment that's in. So a lot of the stuff that I talk about in the book is relevant to lots of different environments, but that theme of trust, it just runs through everything, and also that connection as well. So one of the things that I talk to parents about quite a lot when I'm doing consults is meet your child where they're at. If they're special interest at this time and the thing that they are finding fulfilling and interesting, the thing that they've always got the demand tolerance to is computer gaming or watching a certain film or whatever it might be, like join your child in that, ask them to teach you about it, show an interest in it. That's a really good way to build that connection and to build that trust. And I think the other thing I say to parents as well is that being a parent is really hard work. Being a parent of neurotypical children is really hard work. When you have neurodivergent children or children that have been unwell or children that are experiencing problems with their own mental health, being a parent becomes really hard. And it's okay for you to make a mistake sometimes. I coach other parents for a living. I am nowhere near perfect as a parent. I still make mistakes. I get tired, I snap, I shout. I'm not perfect, none of us are. But it's so important for me, if I do have a snap at my children, to say, I'm really sorry I shouted at you. I'm just feeling really tired at the moment. I really try not to do that again. And again, that's a really good way, if you do lose it sometimes, to make sure you're acknowledging that you didn't get it right, and then you can regain that trust as well. And that's really important. But I think showing an interest in someone's interest is just so valuable.
You mentioned that connection. I was playing a video game with my 13-year-old and I did not do well at all, but I do it anyway. And he thinks it's funny because he wins every time, which is totally fine with me. But joining them, that will build that trust, build that connection, build that communication. And that's an opportunity to work on self-advocacy and autonomy. What a lovely way to package all of those things in them, where they are and in that interest. I love that so much. So tell us a little bit about this book that you're working on.
So it's called The Educator's Experience of Pathological Demand Avoidance. And it's not a guide, it is just a kind of summary really of lots of my experiences that I have had over the years working with these amazing young people with PDA. The book starts with a confession, and the confession is that PDA used to really scare me. Okay, so my first experience when I knew that I was working with someone with PDA was probably about 13 or 14 years ago now. So I went into a specialist school where all the children were autistic, and there was more than one, but there was a few young people in that school who were just completely different to the young people that I taught previously. So I was so used to working with autistic people that needed lots of structure and routine, and to be told, when you've done this, then you'll get that, and here's the reward you're going to get. And it just seemed to work for the majority of those other autistic students. And then there were students in my school who all of those autism approaches that I thought I was so good at using just were counterproductive. They made their anxiety worse. So the book starts with a confession that I realized that everything I was doing was wrong. And it wasn't them that needed to change. It was me and my approach. The book talks about what is PDA. It's the second chapter is all about making connections. It talks about the importance of trust as well. As I said, that sort of weaves through the whole thing. it talks about various sort of different little situations where I've been in, where there's so many that I learned so much from the young people with PDA that I work with. So I've like just written about all these little anecdotes where I've had these like light bulb moments of, that's why they need that, and that's why they don't need that. And then I've just put the collection of all these little stories in the books. But there was a lovely review the other day, and as someone said, if you're looking for a guide of how to work with PDA or people with PDA, this doesn't tell you how to do it. You need to read between the lines. And like I've done over the years, I've worked it out for myself by like always understanding that the young people that I'm working with are highly anxious and have this need for autonomy. They need to trust me. They need to feel safe with me, and how I've done that. There's a chapter on humor. Like, humor is so important when you work with someone with PDA. Like, you've got to have a good sense of humor. You've got to understand that you are probably going to be the butt of their jokes. And you can't have an ego about that. You can't have an attitude, because they don't see authority. It's some of the best sessions I've had with young people I work with have involved us quite literally rolling around on the floor laughing. It talks about the fact you'll have good days, you'll have bad days. You'll have days when the young person will make accelerated progress and you think, oh, yeah, I've really cracked it. And then you'll go back and see them a week later and they don't even want to get off the sofa. And that's okay. Like, that's part of the PDA profile. It's not a linear journey when you work with someone with PDA. It talks about the need to go with the flow of the PDAs, let them take the lead, and you just be there to like help steer them in their journey. It talks about how you can weave their special interest into learning as well, but doing it in a way that doesn't mean that the person feels that you've taken over or tainted their interest. So yeah, I hope it's covered everything. In the back of the book as well, there's a really useful I hope it's useful, like a quick minute reminder. Once you've read the book, you can just refer back to that as like a reminder. And the final chapter as well is all about the importance of collaborating as well. So the most successful learners that I've worked with PDA have been where the parents are really involved in the young person's education. The teaching team are really involved. You might have other professionals involved, like therapists, counsellors. And then if I just show you that picture, because it's one of my absolute favourites, you've got the child in the middle. And that to me is the best way to work with someone with PDA. You've got this child at the heart of everything that you're doing, and then everyone's just working really collaboratively around that child to support them.
I love that. And that's actually a good reminder for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether a child has the profile PDA or not, I think sometimes it's easy to forget the reason. We get bogged down with all the things, and that child should always be in the center. So
yeah, they should.
I appreciate that visual for all of us, for sure.
And it reminds, again, because the book is aimed at educators, although, as I say, I'm really pleased that lots of parents have read it and appreciated it. There's also a reminder there that actually parents are the experts in their children. And we have to listen to parents. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. I know, and I've worked with lots of parents that haven't been listened to, haven't been believed, and that's really damaging for the child and for the parent and for the relationships as well. Like I said, the most successful kind of programs or schools I've worked with are the ones that really appreciate and embrace the parents' input as well. That's so important.
I love that. I definitely agree with you. Parents know their children better than anyone on earth.
They absolutely do.
And their experience and their voices need to be heard. They need to be valued. I will make sure to have a link down in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely chatting to you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on today's episode. If you found this helpful, please consider hitting that like button and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And if you're thinking, oh, I know somebody who would really appreciate this episode, please send it on to them. Also, don't forget, go down to that description below because I have loaded it with free resources and information on my parent workshops and continuing education trainings for therapists. Everything you need to keep learning and growing. Thank you for being here, for caring, and for choosing neurodiversity affirming approaches. I look forward to seeing you next time on Autism ADHD TV. Take care.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.